None of us imagined when we designed this panel over a year ago that we would be where we are at the present moment. And the point of this is, I'm sure it will come up, but we, rather than rehashing and revisiting the daily headlines from the American case, I want to encourage us to think about lessons that can be drawn from China's longstanding repressive measures in higher education after a brief opening in the 1980s, and similarly, lessons that can be drawn from the much less well understood, in America anyway, things happening under the Bharatiya Janata Party government under Prime Minister Modi in India right now, and its approach to curtailing autonomy of higher education since it came to power in 2014. It is a bitter irony that we have an empty seat here tonight, a bitter irony that Professor Apoorvanand Jha cannot be here. Those of you who follow the Indian press will know why he is not able to join us tonight. And I will let him explain in a pre-recorded video the circumstances that led to his not being able to join us tonight. But it will be played after. We'll have Kelly first, and then him, and then Craig. You'll find detailed bios of the panelists and moderators for all of the symposium panels, and I can hardly do justice to each of them here, but let me just briefly offer, by way of a short introduction. First to speak will be Professor Kelly Tsai, Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Humanities at Northeastern University, a position she took up about a year ago, having previously been Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Science at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. The India-China Institute is very fortunate to have Professor Tsai as a member of our external advisory board. There are several board members that you will see here tomorrow as well. As many of you know, Professor Tsai has written widely and highly influential books and articles on China's authoritarian version of capitalism, and has also written and researched about reverse migration and remittances in China and India. She's the author, co-author most recently of The State and Capitalism in China, published in 2023, and the author of Capitalism Without Democracy, the Private Sector in Contemporary China, and her first book, Back Alley Banking, Private Entrepreneurs in China. Professor Apoorvanand Jha is professor of Hindi at the University of Delhi. He has taught previously at Magadh University and Mahatma Gandhi International Hindi University. He has published 2 books of literary criticism that analyze the development of Marxist aesthetics in Hindi literature. Professor Apoorvanand is the editor of the Hindu social science journal Samajik Vishmarsh, which was launched in 2018. As many of you may know, especially if you follow Indian media and political commentary, he is a highly distinguished, highly influential public intellectual who writes regular columns for the India Express and The Wire, contributing also to Scroll and Al Jazeera. His columns offer courageous and critical views of contemporary India, including education, cultural politics, and communalism. And we'll hear certainly from him about all of this in his video tonight. Professor Craig Calhoun, a university professor of social sciences at Arizona State University, has held faculty positions at Columbia, New York University, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. At NYU, as many of you know, he founded the Institute for Public Knowledge, and at Chapel Hill was dean of the graduate school and the director of the University Center for International Studies. He is past president of the London School of Economics, the Social Science Research Council, and the Berkman Institute. Since this is the India-China Institute, I just want to also mention his highly acclaimed account of the 1989 Tiananmen protest, to which he was an eyewitness. The book is Neither Gods Nor Emperors, and I remember reading it as a graduate student and really enjoying it, and one of the most compelling kind of analysis, and it shows you you don't have to be a trained area specialist to do a brilliant analysis of an important political event as that was. Most recently, he's the co-author of Degenerations of Democracy in 2022 and the co-editor of The Green New Deal and the Future of Work. So with that, please join me in welcoming tonight's panelists.
Well, congratulations to ICI on its 20th anniversary. Its mission clearly has never been more valuable than at this moment, 20 years later. I'm really honored to be part of this conversation and share everyone's disappointment that Apoor Vanan is not allowed to join us in person. Although this panel is focused on India, China, and the US, I'm going to start by framing the issue of higher education under the global authoritarian turn in the context of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is part of China, and I spent over a decade of my life and academic/administrative career at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, first as the head of the Division of Social Science, and then later as the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. The photo on the right was taken from my balcony. I really miss Hong Kong. Unlike the US and India, Hong Kong has never been an autonomous democratic country, but for about 3 decades, it was a liberal society with civil liberties like freedom of press and expression and rule of law. There was also academic freedom in the 8 government-funded research universities, which attracted faculty from all over the world, including myself. During my time at HKUST, Hong Kong changed a lot. When I first arrived the summer of 2013, there was a massive cardboard tank built by students commemorating June 4th in the main atrium of the university. By the time I left, the big character boards in the main atrium had been empty for years, except at the end of 2022, a lot of blank A4 pieces of paper were on the democracy wall for a moment, and those were removed as well. 10 years later, HKUST had built a new campus in Guangzhou, China, twice the size of the campus in Hong Kong. It has state-of-the-art surveillance and facial recognition technology, and it's co-led by a HKUST Guangzhou president, as well as a party secretary. My remarks are going to focus on 3 main themes. I'll start by situating shifts in academic freedom in Hong Kong relative to that of India, China, and the US over time. And then I'll reflect on developments in Hong Kong that led to the introduction of the National Security Law in 2020. And I'll make some comparative observations that speak to the broader themes of this panel. Given that authoritarianism is a broad residual category that includes all non-democratic political regimes, I think it's important to look at finer-tuned metrics of academic freedom and then trace how that has changed over time. Even within democratic regimes, there's considerable variation in the extent of academic freedom. And as we're all experiencing right now in the US, that's certainly been the case here as well. So covering 179 countries, that goes back to 1900, the Academic Freedom Index is based on 5 metrics. First, there's the freedom to research and teach, meaning freedom from interference by non-academic actors, such as politicians, party secretaries, externally appointed university management, businesses, foundations, private funders, religious groups, and advocacy groups. Then second, academic exchange and dissemination refers to the freedom to discuss and share research findings among both academic and non-academic audiences. Institutional autonomy means that the university remains in charge of governance, finance, administration, research, and teaching. Campus integrity means that university buildings, digital research and teaching platforms are free from politically motivated surveillance by intelligence agents, student informants, and attacks by third parties specifically targeting universities to repress academic life on campus. And academic and cultural expression, this is from the VDEM, the Varieties of Democracies data set, that captures academics' freedom of expression on political issues. They do distinguish between academic freedom and general freedom of expression. This figure shows countries that have experienced either statistically significant improvements or declines in academic freedom over the past decade. So the 7 countries that are above the diagonal line have improved. That's Montenegro, Gambia, Thailand, Uzbekistan, and Bahrain. But reflecting this panel's theme about the global authoritarian turn in higher education, there are 34 countries below the diagonal line where academic freedom has substantially deteriorated in the past decade, including the US and the UK in the upper right quadrant, that indicates they're still within the top quartile of academic freedom. And then India, Hong Kong, and Myanmar are at the lowest 20th percentile. In the far left corner, you may see a big round green shaded circle about the size of India's. That's China, which hasn't had a statistically significant shift in academic freedom over the past decade. The Academic Freedom Index is measured between 0, meaning no freedom, and 1, which is complete freedom. 1912 was the first year that Hong Kong was indexed when University of Hong Kong was founded, and the level of academic freedom was relatively high. It dipped to 0.4 during World War II, which is consistent with the global trend that happened around the world. Hong Kong's academic freedom peaked at 0.89 between 1995 and 1999. You see that in green font, and that coincides with the years leading up to the handover back to China and the years immediately afterwards. If you look at the last two rows, 2013, I picked that because that's the year I arrived in Hong Kong. That was right after the national education protests and right on the eve of Occupy Central. And 2024 was the year I returned to the US, and it had dropped to an all-time low of 0.24, putting it at the bottom 20% of the 179 countries ranked. To put this in comparative perspective, under colonial rule, India had a highly repressive academic environment with an academic freedom index of 0.14. After independence, it rose significantly to 0.64 and was pretty stable between 1950 and 1973. Then there was a notable drop in 1976, down to 0.30 when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared the emergency in 1975. It rebounded to 0.65 in the 1980s and increased to 0.69 during the 1991 to 97 period when Congress was in power. Note that 0.69 is the same level that Hong Kong was at in 2013. But in the past decade, like Hong Kong, India's academic freedom index has experienced a similar magnitude of a drop, going from 0.47 in 2014 to 0.16 in 2024. And this is comparable to India's pre-independence level. It's even lower than Russia, which is currently at 0.21. I know this is a lot of numbers to look at, but if you just bear with me for one more column, I want to compare this to China. Its peak level of academic freedom was during the Republican era. You can see that in the second row. And then you can see that the environment constricted severely after the People's Republic of China was established in 1949. Oops, did I go back? Oh, no, I gotta go here. And then academic freedom dropped to a nadir of 0.02 during the Cultural Revolution decade. But it reached a peak of 0.20 in 1988. And you'll remember that the decade of the 80s leading up to the end of the decade was a period of considerable intellectual vibrancy and dynamism. And now China is at 0.07. This just shows the breakdown of Hong Kong and academic freedom index along the 5 indicators. It's probably too small for you to see. The main point is that all 5 indicators of academic freedom have declined. So you can see that, the shape. The US. Academic freedom in the US has generally been quite high and stable in the 0.91 or 0.92 range, except for 2 dips during the 2 world wars and also during the early 1950s, during the Red Scare, the McCarthy era, when it dropped to 0.74. But academic freedom has been declining every year since 2019, and it is now at 0.68, which is comparable to Hong Kong's level in 2013 and India's level during the 90s. And believe it or not, the US's level of academic freedom, according to the Academic Freedom Index, is now at the same level as it was in 1918. And that was before the new administration unleashed its rage on higher ed in recent months. As a disclaimer, I acknowledge there could be methodological flaws in the Academic Freedom Index, but they did use the same methodology with at least 2 levels of intracoder reliability with over 2,300 coders, and for every country data point, it's an average of 10 different codes. So if there's bias, it's at least consistent across the cases. To put this in regional perspective, you'll see that the countries we're focusing on in this symposium are at the bottom of each of their packs. So I just put Canada, UK, and US together, and then you see in East Asia, Taiwan has the highest level. Oh, focus on the second column. I mean, the number, it's the ranking out of 179 countries that's interesting. So Taiwan and South Korea have the highest rankings in East Asia, and Hong Kong and China have the lowest rankings in East Asia at 140 and 164 out of 179 respectively. And then you can see India compared with its regional neighbors as well. I put this here because it's not always a regional trend, right? Like even among countries that are adjacent to one another, like Canada and the US, there can be pretty significant differences. Okay, so given the fragility of academic freedom, I just want to shift to what happened in Hong Kong. In 2020, the introduction of a national security law created 4 new offenses that directly impacted academic freedom in Hong Kong: secession, subversion, terrorism, and foreign collusion. And this was underscored by a local national security ordinance in 2024. But a lot had changed by then. Fu Hualing, who's the dean of HKU Law, he's currently visiting at NYU Law School, describes the progression of legislation and academics under attack as, quote, the increasing securitization of higher education. I agree with that characterization and very much saw steadily creeping instances of faculty in Hong Kong who adjusted their syllabi on Chinese history and Chinese politics, on Hong Kong politics and society. One of our historians flat out refused to teach modern China because he just didn't think he could do it in an honest way without compromising his safety. But was the national security law inevitable? And this question just really persists in my mind. Since the early 2000s, Hong Kong experienced 4 significant moments of societal mobilization in reaction to pending or proposed legislation. First, there was the 2003 protests against the provision in Article 23 of the Basic Law that the HKSAR government would enact national security legislation prohibiting treason, secession, sedition, subversion, prohibiting stealing state secrets, prohibiting foreign political entities from conducting political activities in the territory. The proposal to act on this brought 500,000 people to the streets, and the bill was withdrawn. Next, in the summer of 2012, the government announced that a moral and national education curriculum would become mandatory in public schools. And this was when an opposition coalition came together under a student activist group called Scholarism. This was led by Joshua Wong, who was 15 years old at the time. At its peak, the anti-patriotic education movement mobilized about 100,000 protesters. Over a dozen people went on a hunger strike. And after a group occupied the government headquarters for 10 days, Chief Executive C.Y. Leung conceded that national education would not be required in schools. The youth that were mobilized by Scholarism would then go on to participate in the Umbrella Movement in the fall of 2014, which was growing out of the Occupy Central protests that summer. And this happened after the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress issued a white paper saying that limiting access to the nomination process for the chief executive in a way that circumscribed the principle of universal suffrage. That movement lasted for 79 days. Since it disrupted the main commercial areas of Hong Kong, businesses sought court injunctions to have the occupied areas cleared of protesters. And then there were the 2019 anti-extradition bill protests that escalated to a much broader swath of the population, with about 2 million people on the steamy streets of Hong Kong at its peak. Were there missed opportunities for the Hong Kong government to show that it had things under control and could manage what Beijing would perceive as turmoil on the streets? Just to remind everyone what happened, the extradition bill was formally proposed in April of 2019. April. The bill was intended to allow Hong Kong to extradite people from its territory to mainland China who are wanted for crimes. This was totally alarming to Hong Kongers because Hong Kong is populated by people who left China for a safe haven. The anti-extradition bill protests started out totally peacefully, typical Hong Kong style, and then increasingly on a large scale by the summer of 2019, including on June 4th and on July 1st. And then it escalated even further after the Yuanlong MTR attack by triads on July 21st, when the police let them attack protesters without intervening. There's a widely shared perception that Hong Kong's leadership did not have to stubbornly insist on persisting with an extradition bill, which was ultimately withdrawn 6 months later in October. By then, it was too late. Protests had escalated into greater violence, and a number of university campuses were completely paralyzed by November. I believe in human agency. Perhaps Hong Kong's leadership could have made different choices earlier on. The decline in academic freedom in Hong Kong has had implications for the demographic of academics. Even though the outflow of expats, 1 minute? Okay.
You're fine.
Academic freedom
Wow. Okay. Let me go through this. So the upshot is now there's a decreasing percentage of locals that are actually employed in local universities in Hong Kong. Expats are leaving, but locals are leaving at a much higher rate. So that's one thing I wanted to say. I'm just pointing out at the number of universities where there are significantly more mainland faculty than local faculty. And also students. The University Grants Council of Hong Kong recently reported that 75% of non-local students enrolled in Hong Kong universities are actually from the mainland. So I think it's important to keep that reality in mind. Hong Kong isn't just another mainland city. It's still a bridge between the East and the West, and increasingly a bridge between mainland origin academics in the West who feel more comfortable in Hong Kong than either in the West or in the mainland. And meanwhile, very quickly, as the US declines in appeal to Chinese students, India's share of international students in the US has more than doubled over the past decade, going from 12% to 29% of the total. India is the blue line and China is the orange line. And now the number of students from India studying in the US exceeds that of China. The US still attracts a lot of students from both countries, but there have been some recent SEVIS visa revocations that have targeted both Chinese and Indian students. So if that continues, these figures could decline. And finally, I'll just bring things back to the level of how faculty are coping in these contexts and make a few observations. This is my last slide. Okay, in China and India, there's been heavy-handed political interference, limiting what faculty can teach and do research on. In the US, we recently entered that stage with states like Texas and Florida revamping state curriculums, and at the federal level, various executive orders and funding agency directives have been effectively banning research on climate justice, race, so-called gender ideology, misinformation, and they're accusing institutions of engaging in so-called illegal DEI practices and anti-Semitism. And as some of you may have noticed, the NSF director, Ponch, just resigned today. But what I want to point out here is that the erosion of academic freedom is felt more viscerally and anxiously than the expansion of academic freedom. Like, you notice it more when you're losing it than when you're getting more of it. Second, the pace and the scale of erosion is relevant. Hong Kong, India, and more recently in the US, it happened really quickly. And it's so much more of a shock to the system than in China, which has had low levels of academic freedom all along. State-sponsored censorship is pernicious and attracts international media attention, but self-censorship on the part of faculty, students, and everyday citizens is even more powerful. I'd also like to suggest that we're not at a post-liberal moment, but rather an anti-liberal, illiberal, or anti-pluralist moment that is deeply polarized. 77 million people voted for Trump, but 75 million voted for Harris. The anti-liberal party won the presidential election. And there's still a lot of people in the US and elsewhere who value pluralism, multiculturalism, and the original humanistic intentions of the DEIB agenda. And finally, I realized I haven't directly addressed the tough questions posed by our moderator, the future of liberal education, how can higher ed counter these attacks, how to sustain international educational exchanges. As the first speaker, I'm counting on Apoorv and Craig to answer them. But I will end, and I really am wrapping up now. I'll end with the observation that attacks on institutions such as independent media, universities, and entire government agencies aren't just attacks on institutions, but attacks on individuals within those institutions. And it's ultimately up to the individuals that give content and direction to institutions. We all know from the study of institutional analysis that pre-existing institutions can be redeployed to serve alternative purposes depending on the people who are leading them and staffing them. So when it comes to universities, presidents are the public-facing representatives, and they're under all sorts of pressure from below, externally. But then there's an entire army of deans, department chairs, program directors, and rank-and-file faculty who are individuals. When I was in Hong Kong, I urged our faculty not to engage in anticipatory obedience after the passage of the national security law because it wasn't clear what the red lines were, and we shouldn't draw those red lines ourselves. And now, just a few years later, I'm saying the same thing in the US to faculty in the humanities and social sciences.
Okay, this video is about 22 minutes, and you will not want to leave the room, I promise.
Namaskar. Let me first begin by thanking the India-China Institute for inviting me to participate in this symposium on the university under global authoritarian turn. I apologize for not being able to be with you physically. I feel sorry for myself, as the idea of a symposium is not to make one-way presentations, but to have a dialogue, to be able to see other points of view, and also rethink and revise yourself if necessary. And I have been deprived of that by my university. My university, the University of Delhi, decided to give us a live demonstration of what a university looks like or does under a global or national authoritarian turn. It asked me to submit the draft of my presentation for this symposium, which it wanted to share with the Government of India for its advice or approval before I was granted leave to attend the symposium here. The authorities agreed that there was no such rule which made it necessary for them to get my speech vetted or censored by the government. I had to point out to them that by doing this, they were compromising the autonomy of the institution and also the academic freedom of a faculty member. Yet they insisted. The University of Delhi, seen by outsiders as the most powerful and prestigious university in India, was handing over its power to the government voluntarily without even being asked. Normally, you would expect the teachers' body representing the teachers to criticize this move. The Delhi University Teachers Association chose to remain silent, as it has always been in these last 5 years on the issues of institutional autonomy or academic freedom. The inaction of DUTA is because of the leadership being aligned with the ruling party at the center, the Bharatiya Janata Party. It will rather collaborate with authorities to persecute teachers who are seen as liberal or left. It has organized McCarthyite campaigns to eradicate red terror from the campus in the past. This incident gives you an idea of how universities in India have been behaving under a regime which can only politely be called authoritarian. It would be more apt to describe it as an authoritarian regime with a clearly fascist vision. While authoritarianism is experienced by all sections of society more or less equally, fascism affects only specifically targeted religious, ethnic, or linguistic minorities adversely. The pain of the minority is the gain of the majority. In India, a majority of Hindus would tell you that the regime is democratic and represents their will. That is, that is why the government has been enacting laws taking away the rights of Muslims and persecuting them. It gives the majority a feeling that it is disciplining a deviant minority legitimately. Along with it also come laws and executive orders which restrict democratic rights of the people. But the majority thinks that it is necessary to let the government do its main job of persecuting Muslims in an unfettered way, unhindered by the irritant critics. The flag bearer of Indian fascism is the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, a so-called Hindu cultural organization inspired by Hitler and Mussolini. It is also, ironically, an open admirer of the Zionist project in Israel of creating a Jewish-only state and treats it as an ideal. The brutality of Israel in dealing with the Palestinians is especially appealing to it, and it seeks to use the same brutal methods to punish Muslims and Christians here in India. The Bharatiya Janata Party is the political wing of the RSS. RSS seeks to turn India into a Hindu nation in which Muslims and Christians would have no political power and will be allowed only to live like second-class citizens. To justify its policies, the RSS claims that India has originally been a land of Hindus and all others are latecomers. Hence, Hindus have the first right over India, and they also have a right to determine what it means to be Indian and impose its idea of the Indian way of living on all others mandatorily. It is important that such policies and concepts be made part of the common sense of the Hindu masses. That Hindu common sense is crafted through education. So all processes of education from school to the university level have to be heavily controlled by the regime on behalf of the RSS. It wants to concoct a past of India which is exclusively Hindu and which, according to RSS ideologues, already possessed everything in the field of knowledge which the West either stole from it or later copied. The early Hindus had been leaders in all fields, from medicine to linguistics. Hindu society before coming of Muslims and Christians to the subcontinent was harmonious. The concept of caste, it claims, is an entirely colonial construct. Western social sciences are condemned as a conspiracy to sow conflict in a society where it never existed. So it is trying to create a true Indian social science which would not be centered on conflict as it accuses Western social science of being. This is part of the decolonization project undertaken by the present regime. The regime is also intruding into the field of sciences with an aim to create an Indian science. Engineering institutions like the IITs and medical institutions like AIIMS are also being used for this. Universities are using their resources to propagate the so-called Indian knowledge systems. I use the word propaganda consciously as there is no new knowledge to be created. All one has to do is to celebrate the great, glorious achievement of our ancestors. One example is massive investment in the propagation of Sanskrit, which the regime has declared to be the mother of all languages of the world. This drive aims at making Sanskrit a language of daily conversation. Second is to force educational institutions to adopt Hindi as the first national language. This project has unfolded gradually in the last 10 years and was given a garb of respectability by making it part of a new national education policy known as NEP, which was unveiled in 2020 through an executive order. It was not discussed in the parliament and the states, which have a say in the matter of education. They were not consulted. education is on the concurrent list, which means that states have a crucial say in the matters of education. But states were never meaningfully consulted while crafting this new education policy. Read closely, NEP is nothing but a set of confused ideas, but it has become a convenient cover to the project of decolonizing and Indianizing education. The universities have been portrayed as spaces, and this, when I say this, I go back to the years of 2015 and 2016, when the new government was very fresh. Then the universities were portrayed as spaces where the regime's critiques find shelter. They are seen as fifth columnists and traitors who support the minorities and are anti-nationals. The defamation of universities in the eyes of the people makes it very easy for the regime to control them without any resistance. Big media of India participated in this denigration game enthusiastically. Universities, teachers, and students were vilified, and a nationalist resentment built against them. Now, after 10 years of this vilification campaign, there is hardly any support for the universities among the masses. Intellectuals have been thoroughly discredited. Movies have been made using real-life characters from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, portraying them as supporters of terrorism and enemies of the nation. Unlike the Republican government of the USA, the Indian government has not issued any circular or memo to the universities. It has not threatened them with fund cuts if they refuse to follow its dictate. The universities have largely decided to give away their autonomy without even being asked. They have, under their acts, all the authority to hire faculty, do admissions to various courses, and design their curricula and syllabi themselves. But in the last 10 years, we have seen them ceding all of these to bodies outside the university, especially to the University Grants Commission. And it has been done by using the authority of the University Grants Commission, the apex body in the field of higher education in India. It was established in 1956 to make provision for the coordination and determination of standards in university. Section 12 authorized UGC to allocate and disperse grants to universities for the determination and maintenance of standards of teaching, examination, research. It has used this provision to define what the standards are and should be, and has linked it with the way faculty appointments are to be made, admission of students to various courses be done, syllabi and curricula be designed, and selection of vice chancellors be done. One must note that in the acts of the universities, the UGC has no role in the affairs of the universities, but they have been accepting its orders quite willingly. Any outsider would wonder how universities caved in so meekly. It was done in multiple ways: by appointing heads of institutions closely affiliated to the RSS or those willing to follow its diktat. They behave more or less as spokespersons or propagandists of the ruling regime and the RSS than academic leaders. Second, by appointing faculty members affiliated or loyal to the RSS in large numbers. It must also be noted that the majority of them are incompetent and not fit to be teachers. They are going to remain there for next 30 years. And they are also going to make further appointments as they will get promoted as professors, and then they will have power to appoint new faculty. Third, by getting the syllabi and curricula designed centrally. Universities are also turning away from classroom teaching to online platforms. A sign of what is to become a norm soon could be seen from when the Jamia Millia Islamia issued an order making 40% online learning compulsory. This is the best way to control the uncertainties of classroom teaching, because there would still be a free exchange of ideas if classes existed or classrooms existed. The idea is to kill them. The UGC is therefore asking universities to make 70% online learning compulsory. By controlling all research bodies which give grants for research projects in the fields of humanities and social sciences, even sciences are being Indianized through phony research projects. There has not been much resistance to it from the teaching community. The regime has ensured through the process of reward and punishment to create a culture of compliance in the teaching community. The experiment started in JNU. Teachers have been denied promotion for years. Principle of seniority violated regularly and in a rampant manner. While making administrative appointments, teachers denied leave for seminars or academic consultations. All this has demoralized the teachers, and they have started exercising caution in their classrooms and public utterances. Teachers who try to keep doing what they have been doing have faced criminal cases for their classroom lectures, talks, seminars, and extramural activities like writing in newspapers or speaking publicly, suspension, and even physical violence, and jail. They have been jailed for their academic work. A college principal in a law college in Indore, a city in the state of Madhya Pradesh, lost his job and faced criminal cases along with a colleague because the nationalists found an objectionable book in the college library. A teacher lost his job because he had framed an ideologically wrong question in a political science examination. Teachers fear that their classroom lectures could be recorded and then misused. So they have started self-censoring themselves even in classrooms. Indian campuses have always seen intellectual discussion outside the classroom involving diverse viewpoints. But for the last 10 years, all voices other than the Hindu nationalist voices have been banished. You cannot hold seminars, discussions, film screenings which deviate from the Indian nationalist theme approved by the regime. Yet students resist it. We have soon seen students agitating against this illiberal turn of universities. To control them, authorities use punishment like withholding of degrees, fines, and expulsions. The courts have been intervening regularly and overturning these acts of the universities. But it takes a heavy toll on the students. Not all of them can withstand this pressure. It has led to students keeping themselves away from the campus activism as the price is heavy. Student activists, apart from these punitive actions, have also to face violence from the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, ABVP, the student wing of the RSS, which behaves like the stormtroopers of the regime on the campus. The beat up students and teachers break their meetings and act as an oversight agency reporting teachers and students, forcing authorities to take action against them. Recently, on their complaint, a teacher of the Chaudhary Charan Singh University in Meerut was barred for life from setting question papers as she was found guilty of framing questions found ideologically wrong by the ABVP. The campuses would, however, give you a sense of normalcy. Classes are being held and campuses are full of activities. The seminars and discussions allowed can only propagate the ideology of the Hindu nationalism or Indian supremacy. RSS functionaries lecture teachers even in the faculty development programs, which are supposed to strictly dealing with their disciplines. Colleges have opened Gaushala, cow sheds, in the name of doing research on the qualities of cow products like cow dung, cow urine, etc. A university in Surat justifies it. Surat is a town in the state of Gujarat. It justifies the opening of the cowshed by saying that the presence of cows purifies the atmosphere and drives away evil thoughts from the campus. Higher education institutions have built temples in their premises and regularly hold Hindu religious events. One must also say that demonstration of non-Hindu religious identity is not only discouraged but criminalized. Women students in hijab are disallowed. Students performing namaz have been penalized, suspended, and arrested. There is silencing of Muslims and Christians' voices in Indian universities. Muslim students, especially from Kashmir, have learned to invisibilize themselves. This is the story of the last 11 years of life of public universities in India. What about the elite private universities like Ashoka or Jindal or Kriya? They ask their faculty to remain under the radar, or they would face the fate of Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who was gently told by the promoters of the Ashoka University to voluntarily step down from the vice chancellorship as his public writing was creating difficulty for the university. Teacher and student activism is discouraged, and teachers are not allowed to unionize by these private universities. What India is witnessing on its campuses is a Hindutva cultural insurrection or cultural revolution. It involves discrediting the existing scholarship, portraying intellectuals as enemies of the nation, students as a drain on the resources of the nation, trivializing and vulgarization of disciplines by Indianizing them. Teachers have to mouth the official version of knowledge. It won't be wrong to say that if it continues for another 5 years, we can lose the very sense of knowledge. The current generation of students on the campuses would not know what it means to do history or sociology or even science. Indian fascism cannot win without this dumbing down of the campuses. I thank you for patiently listening to me, and I'm again very sorry that I won't be able to benefit from your responses. I want to say that India is not an exception. I am quite aware of the fact that this authoritarian turn that India has taken and now is firmly on its path, authoritarian path, or as I said, that it's moving in a direction when it can only be a fascist state, it shares the fate of other countries. I know where this seminar is happening is also struggling with this authoritarianism. We all, when we get together in these interactions, in these meetings, in this symposia or seminar, all of us try to at least keep the idea of diversities of views alive and not let one voice take over. Again, I thank India-China Institute and congratulate the Institute on its 20th anniversary. Thank you all. Thank you.
And after Professor Apurvanand sent that video to us, he then followed up with an email and just asked me to please read on his behalf 3 sentences, which I will quickly do as Craig is getting ready. So he says the following by way of conclusion to you. Universities can respond to authoritarianism in 2 ways. One way is to alert the society and resist the regime, as the universities in America are trying to do. Second, alternatively, is to facilitate fascism and serve as an instrument of the regime to crush free minds, which the Indian universities are doing gleefully. Congratulations again on your 20th anniversary, and my best wishes for the event.
All right, let me begin by expressing thanks to Manjari, Mark, and all the other organizers of the conference, and in absentia to the founders, Arjun and Ben, and to all those who built and sustained the ICI over the years. And we could extend that and say to all those who have built and sustained universities over the years within which there can be institutes like the ICI. Thanks to the previous speakers, hard act to follow, and thanks to the New School, which has long been a key home for critical intellectual life and a distinctive setting for the ICI. With that in mind, I want to add a footnote to Manjari's very nice introduction to the conference and the ICI. One of the problems with traditional area studies was that it could be fit in some people's imaginations, always wrongly but influentially, into a model separating place as concrete and specific and theory as abstract and generalizing, as in the old terms of the Methodenstreit, ideographic and nomothetic. This was always a specious division on many dimensions. It was wrong about theory, as should have been clear from the wide importance of theoretical work coming out of area studies. Think of Emanuel Wallerstein or Benedict Anderson or Arjun Appadurai himself. It was also neglectful of the specifically European provenance of much theory. It was wrong about place, which is not so obvious, so fixed, or so theory-free as some have imagined. And indeed, we have Prasenjit Dwara with us, who has importantly contested the idea of the obviousness of the national and regional constructions in relation to others. This is especially true, perhaps, for the notion of area in area studies. I won't try to detail the baggage, but there's a lot. Also neglected the importance of comparison within and across ostensible areas. Comparison does key intellectual work that defies the false opposition of ideographic and nomothetic of place and theory. Among other things, this made it special to introduce the India-China Institute at the New School, which was and is an extraordinary center for mostly European critical theory. European critical theory has not always distinguished itself by attention to concrete cultural and political contexts in the rest of the world. So the ICI had a mission to the New School and through the New School to wider intellectual debates. The New School also had an important history in efforts to understand America, by which I mean both the United States especially, with long history of pivotal work, and the Americas more generally, with an increasing presence of Latin American scholars and students. ICI brought a kind of perspective on what has been called globalization, but has never been simply universalism. And again, it was important to have this perspective as part of the New School. This makes ICI and the New School important for grasping and debating what is going on now in the current crisis of global political economy, institutions, and culture. So I shift to, I've said everything optimistic I have to say. I now shift to the global predicament that our title suggests. But universities, as we know them, grew out of scholarly refuges against a world of authoritarian states, empires, and government. They grow out in different traditions of academies, the old Confucian academies in the Chinese tradition, out of monasteries in different varying traditions, Buddhist in India and Christian in Europe and so forth. And they've been under pressure before. Let me remark on the invention of the American Association of University Professors. The AAUP, famous for its defense of academic freedom, was founded in part, its founding occasioned by the pressure at some universities, particularly one about 8 miles north of here, to have professors endorse the World War I US government effort. Now, the objections to that came not simply from people who didn't endorse the war effort, but from some, like famously John Dewey, who did endorse the war effort, but said that the compulsion of Nicholas Murray Butler, the Columbia University president, vitiated his support. His support was meaningless if it was forced. And so it was necessary to have academic freedom for the statements of academics to have full meaning in public affairs. This also connected in 1919 to the founding of the New School and to its early programs in broader education in New York City, but it foreshadowed the connection that would come again in the 1930s as the New School housed a variety of immigrant intellectuals seeking not just a place to live, but a place to carry on their intellectual work. Of course, there are new government attacks today. I want to acknowledge these, and I'll say a bit about them because one can't pass them up, but I want to stress also the implications of structural transformations in universities and society, which intensify some of the results of government attacks and weaken universities in their potential responses. One difference is how much higher education has expanded, which changes dramatically the place of universities in society compared to 1919 or even the 1930s. Right. The US now has 79% of the age cohort enrolled in some form of higher education. So does the People's Republic of China. In China, that's a dramatic and very rapid transformation. Now, that doesn't mean that they are all going to universities of the top group, but it does mean that higher education is integrated in a different way into society. And this is true in the US as well, and it's increasingly true in India, although the enrollment figures are dramatically lower in India, about 33% on the comparable index of enrollment in some form of higher education. So just note, and as I'm going to go on, that this changes what higher education is, right? It changes what it is in the popular mind, what it is for the government, what universities are, how they operate, right? And it integrates university education into a transformed political economy of the countries and the globe in which it exists. Not least, it comes with great inequality. The idea of university under attack today is also challenged by the proliferation of universities, the hundreds of new universities built in China, the dramatic expansion and different kinds of universities and other sorts of tertiary education institutions in India and indeed in the US, right? Great inequality, but higher education has become central to aspirations for national ambitions in this context of so-called knowledge society and new technologies, and personal ambitions for life. Global authoritarianism, our title, is really not global, except in being widespread. It's a widespread trend in the manipulation of nationalism for authoritarian purposes. This is the thing, the authoritarianism we're looking at. India, China, and the US are all exemplars, and academic freedom is a casualty. In varying ways and degrees, in different countries, but also for different kinds of institutions, right, and different parts of the population. I want to call attention not only to direct attacks and repression, very much on our minds today, but to broader patterns that affect vitality and critical debate. Academic freedom is a broadly liberal conception that calls attention to some issues about universities and society, but not all. We might ask, among other things, academic freedom for whom, right? See how the conversation in the US today is dominated by the Harvard and Columbia experience, that even the richest and most elite universities can be attacked. But then ask about the larger society. There's a tendency to focus on the elite and forget others. How are universities instrumentalized? What are the effects of particular patterns? Let me just signpost this by saying, recall debates over academic freedom in the context of anti-Vietnam War protests and academic research mobilized to support the war. The alliances can vary. Student protests, moreover, are not always in favor of academic freedom, even though student protests are important to societal freedom more generally. We have to pay attention to some complexities of these concepts. Also, authoritarianism represses freedom, intellectual freedom included, in ways that have academic repercussions, but are not best addressed as matters of academic freedom, but often of broader freedoms, including free speech generally, but a range of freedoms. And again, think about the way in which universities map onto social inequality and freedom to attend the university. Is it the freedom of the university always that we want, or a freedom of a wider society, which might be advanced by universities, but with very different implications on whether they are organized on an exclusive basis to turn away most applicants, or inclusive bases, and with what kinds of differentiation. But also other things. Take restrictions on visas and mobility. Authoritarian has been blocked in mobility by a specific violation of academic freedom, but universities are affected by broader ways in which regimes of migration and immigration and visiting on various kinds of visa statuses, right, are integral to the modern world, right, not just as attacks on universities. Brief comments on India, China, the US, and I do need to get to conclusion. First, I want to call attention to Apoorvanand's book on academic freedom, which wasn't in his brief bio that it was mentioned, The Idea of the University. And the very title, not just echoing Cardinal Newman, but calling our attention to the extent to which these issues bear on the very idea of the university. I will add, in his spirit too, transformations in what university means. The idea of the university is often articulated as though it is an unchanging ideal over centuries, but it is, of course, constantly changing, and how it's changing and being represented matters. Call attention in the same vein to his point that Indian fascism damages intellectual life in universities through actions that are not specific to universities, and to which academic freedom is at best a partial response. Of course, there are specific violations of academic freedom. Politicized appointments to faculty and firing of vice chancellors and hiring, all the things that he cited as well. The Pratap Manometra case at Ashoka is just the most famous of what is a much wider range of issues. And it calls our attention also to a system that is shifting, and the relations between private and public universities, because Indian higher education is being reshaped by the introduction of a set of private universities that offer some freedoms and some advantages that reflect very large fortunes. They are, in a sense, the universities sponsored by oligarchs to a large extent at one end, but for-profit universities at another end, right? And this is remaking the world that had been overwhelmingly one of public universities. The rise of the IITs is a remarkable phenomenon in itself, but also linked to a devaluing of humanities, social sciences, and the traditional universities which are traditionally unruly. Government interference extends to other institutions. Center for the Study of Developing Societies, for example, to take one that many people will know, where the use of audits, where the demand that the government have places on appointments, commissions, and other things have deeply eroded an institution. Additional challenges come from shifts in wider intellectual and sometimes anti-intellectual milieu. Apoorva and I call our attention to the nationalist vilification campaigns of the RSS and BJP, which are very basic. But I think there's also been a transformation that would need attention, not just a sentence, but real attention in publishing, in cultural communication, in the way in which intellectual life in India flourishes outside of, though in close relationship to, universities. People internationally are likely to be familiar with the Economic and Political Weekly, but it's just one, and sadly changed, but one of many sorts of publishing projects that have existed. And it's a reminder to us that when we think of academic freedom, we think of what we value in intellectual life, it's not just what goes on in the universities, but an interrelationship with a wider range of institutions, like publishers and the media. In China, all right, the expansion, as I've already said, has been enormous and remarkable, an extraordinary expansion and transformation of higher education. Universities have been instrumentalized for national ambition, right? The expansion is not just let's have more and more and more versions of Beida or Tsinghua or other elite universities, but let's create universities devoted to business, to science and technology, right? And to particular fields of science and technology. So the creation of hundreds of universities, the 400 that were signaled at the beginning of Xi Jinping's career and so forth, isn't necessarily an expansion of universities teaching liberal arts curricula, to link to the questions posed to us at the beginning. These universities, moreover, are instrumentalized for national ambition, with a lot of pressure on the academics in them to produce for export industry, right? To produce for medical advancement, even to produce for Olympic success, right? To produce superior human capital, superior technology, and to succeed in economic competition. There's an emphasis on hierarchy among these universities. It would be hard to imagine, but I think it's true, or it may be hard to imagine people, but I think it's true, that China actually surpasses the US for an obsession with hierarchy. Right? The US was the world's great pioneer of rankings, but we've been outdone, outranked, you might say. This is coupled with actual hierarchy and with tight control, including censorship. There are various versions of tight control. There's the ironic block on the Beida Student Marxist Society expressing solidarity with workers. There's rapidly intensified repression in Hong Kong, to which Professor Tsai has already referred, right? Which has the specific connection that Hong Kong long played a special role in a largely, though not as severely repressive China, as a place where there was a particularly high degree of freedom and in which memory could flourish, because often memory was the victim of repression in China, and the place of Hong Kong and others at the periphery was crucial to that. Right? I've just had an interesting but indicative brush with this. I'm on the editorial board of a journal called Communication and the Public. And the editors in China, now in China, it started, edited here, right? At the stage of proofs for an article about to go to print, determined that the word authoritarian could not be used. Right? leading to a range of members of the editorial board to resign and a big kerfuffle. And eventually there's been a sort of resolution. There will be a new editorial policy. This will be rectified. It will be okay to say, as we do at this conference, that there is authoritarianism in the world and even in China. But it's indicative of the very small but very numerous ways in which a chilling environment is created for intellectual work that may have critical significance. Very briefly on the US, in this context, the US, as we were told at the beginning, Joel, should always have been part of what we think about when we think of India and China. But, right, the US is also a major focus of a campaign, right, of vilification that is illuminated by seeing it in comparison to the BJP campaigns in India, of literally nationalist vilification of higher education. It's distinctive in that it combines the nationalist attacks, which is part of what the attacks on DEI and the weaponization of critical race theory and all of this by Christopher Rufo and other activists are. They are literally part of a movement of national conservatism, right? But they also, right, are rooted in resentment, because part of what is mobilized in the US case is not just nationalism, but the resentment of those who feel they don't get their due from the highly unequal system of the country or of higher education. There's also, though, a tradition here of production of alternative claims to and traditions of knowledge, just as Apurvanand described in India, so that the national conservative movement and other related movements are presenting other kinds of ideas which they think the universities discriminate against. And they're partly right, actually. There has been restriction, not exactly in the terms that they describe it, but this is part of what's being developed. There is a large non-academic world of esoteric nationalism and traditionalism that is at issue. There's the issue of how anti-Semitism was weaponized after the Gaza protests. Right? So national conservatism and tensions over these issues raise the question of whether culture must be embraced as found, given authority as mythically reimagined and celebrated, or remade by some combination of debate and continued creativity. And it helps us to see that part of what the investment of the university is, in fact, in memory, but a lot of it is in the capacity to remake and the necessity of remaking culture. The structure of inequality I've already alluded to. It's a structure of what I've called hierarchical inclusion. The only way to get in is to get in at a particular place in the hierarchy and deal with the fact that you are in that hierarchy. You've been admitted to college, great, but you've been admitted to college at this level in the system. What's that going to do to your chances, right? This is linked to an overproduction of elites. All the people in the room with white hair, which is more than a few of us, have played a role in this by being a part of an academic system that knew expansion and only expansion for decades, produced too many PhD students who couldn't get tenure-track jobs, expanded universities that began to offer PhDs where they shouldn't be offering PhDs, and in general, overproduced. Not because those people aren't smart, not because they don't have intellectual contributions, but because it transforms the institutions to have the world of academic precarity, as we know it in employment, but also to have machines for dissatisfaction. The extent to which people get degrees that they believe should entitle them, at the very least, to middle-class jobs, but possibly to tenured professorships, and don't get those payoffs. This system also ties us to a perennial search for money, right? And universities are remade and changed, and the very idea of academic freedom is changed by that. We've seen in the recent fights, it's not just what the federal government does, it's what donors demand that challenges universities. And we've made that by engaging in a competition for academic prestige that has driven up costs of the university. and created this dependence on money. So we have to deal with this in ourselves as well as in those. And it extends to reliance on fee-paying foreign students. How much this is part of the funding model of American universities, which creates a vulnerability in our new context, not only American universities. The financial and organizational structure of higher education is therefore as important to freedom as government attacks or control. Government attacks and control are really damaging, and pursuit of control are really damaging. But, right, the transformed organizational structure is also an issue. The growing ranks of non-faculty and not quite faculty positions in universities challenge traditional ideas of academic freedom. As I said at the beginning, whose freedom in this context? The prioritization of funded research over actual intellectual impact, let alone intellectual creativity or debate, challenges what's going on. I'm hoping that the answer to the next question will be nobody's heard of it at the new school. But have you ever heard of by the way, the director of the National Science Foundation just resigned in one of the many casualties of what's going on in Washington. But have you heard of the National Science Foundation's HERD Index? So the National Science Foundation has produced a ranking of universities and research, right, which it publishes annually, no secret, with the great poorly chosen name HERD, H-E-R-D, Higher Education Research and Development. It is a ranking of universities by how much money they expend on research. Not by the quality of research, not by the impact of research. It's not even a reduction to citation counts. It's a ranking by how much money is expended on research. Okay. Carnegie has just reorganized the classification of American universities to make things like how many PhDs are produced and how much money is spent on research part of the classification metric. All of this contributes to an ironic marginalization of the once central arts and sciences. Here, as in India, as in China, the commonalities are strong. I'll close, since my time is up, by saying this also sets up a world in which the challenge to academic freedom, as indeed the AAUP has recognized, is one of dealing with anticipatory obedience, to use the phrase introduced by Tim Snyder in his book on tyranny. That is, the universities enforcing on themselves an advance obedience to what they anticipate will be the demands of those who represent repression. Thank you.
So we had an extremely rich and varied approaches to discussing this problem of the university under a global authoritarian turn. And we have a mic that's going to be passed around the room. Someone going to do that? And I'm looking for first questions, and I'm happy to invite David Ludden to please. Here, yeah.
I just want to underline the importance of the political economy angle and the extent to which the political economy angle needs to be nailed down to particular cases. A case has actually been referred to several times that I'd like to underline the extent to which it was not the Trump administration that started squashing academic freedom in New York City. It was the universities at Columbia and NYU, and they did it in response to, as what President Tower would have said, something that's not unexpected and it's not unusual. It's what we call the Israel exception. In other words, this was a particular repression in response to a criticism of genocide in Gaza. This is actually a very, very specific, shall we say, escalation of a very long-term repression of a people that's been part of the critical discourse at the New School and everywhere else for a long time. But boom, when Gaza comes and the protests come out, the university literally cracks down. This is very serious business. And then you ask the question, why did they do that? It wasn't nationalist anything. It really was donor-driven, a political movement was afoot in the United States that was connected to the government of Israel, that's related to the whole process by which the American military establishment is supported by the subsidy, by the huge amounts of money that are spent on it, et cetera. It goes on and on and on. But the political economy angle, I think, would focus maybe on the corporations, on corporate funding, and not just, as you say, Craig, not just for the universities, but for the arms industry and for the government in general. So I think these particular cases actually are very illustrative, that we could maybe focus on more very specific things like that.
Okay, thank you. New responses to David's comments?
Well, let me add, so I agree completely, David, and it's great to see you. I would only add one way in which I think you're right that the political economy matters, if you will, net of any nationalist ideological campaigns in the US, but maybe not net of the project of remaking the world in national terms and remaking the relationship of Israel to the Jewish diaspora in new nationalist terms. And remaking the relationship of Israel to a securitized global economy. So that political economy would extend into the arms industry, intelligence industry, Palantir Corporation, the side of the Israeli military-industrial complex, and that too. And that can't be fully disaggregated from the kind of, if you will, national conservatism represented by the Netanyahu regime.
Nidhi.
Do I need to get up? No. I would like to raise a question. Before this presentation, I saw academic freedom as a transcendent value, and maybe that was a mistake on my part. I'm being quite serious when I say this. One implication of your three presentations is to see academic freedom as actually a construct of a capitalist regime. For instance, Professor Calhoun, when you spoke, of course, it's extraordinary that you said that at the New School, but of course, when Thomas Dewey does say to the president of Columbia University that, academic freedom is not when you mandate it, when you force me to support the war, one way to see that is that the United States is in a moment of extraordinary expansion. We're moving towards a dramatic collapse of agreement, which will then be resutured by the Bretton Woods Agreement and so forth. So academic freedom in that sense seems to be nestled within a larger setting where certain understandings exist within capitalist regimes. If that makes sense, then it would not be surprising that both in India and in China, at a moment when some believe that US hegemony has collapsed, that academic freedom can be also very casually thrown aside. If that argument has any value, I would then ask, if I can be a little provocative, is it fair then to say that the loss of academic freedom is a larger loss of the liberal left globally? It is today, Gramsci's ideas today are being best used, it would seem, by the right. One thinks of the passive revolution precisely in that sense. If academic freedom was a liberal ideology, it seems to have been ultimately wasted by those who supported it in the hope of creating a liberalism that would last.
Responses to that? I was also thinking, one hears the argument that if there is one, if there's one red line drawn around a certain topic or a certain area of discussion, then you're on the slippery slope, and academic freedom is endangered everywhere. But it's very interesting to see an escape, as the Academic Freedom Index does, to do this in a very scalar way. And so I guess I'll ask Kelly, do you think that academic freedom is effectively measured in the way that the index that you cited does, or is it more binary, even to go to the other extreme? It's either there or not.
Is this on?
Yeah, I just flipped it up.
Okay. It could be measured in a binary way. I think Freedom House has more of a binary measure. There are different ways of getting at it, but I think what I appreciate about the Academic Freedom Index's 5 metrics is sometimes you can have you can still have freedom of expression, but then you don't have campus integrity, or you don't have autonomy, or like, it's not always symmetrical. And there's certain value in understanding what the boundaries are. So maybe you can still invite, you still have control over your syllabus, but you have less control over exchanges. Or so I do see some degree of value of that. I do want to return back briefly to the political economy angle that David mentioned, which I really appreciate. Having been in administration for over a decade now, I do view higher ed as an industry and a sector in and of itself. And it's amazing how reliant it's become on federal funding as well as international tuition. You know, basically elite kids of international elites who can pay full tuition. And we're here in the US, we're feeling it regardless of whether you're a private or a public institution at the moment. So it's just changed so dramatically in the past several decades. That's more of an observation.
Okay, yes.
So, hi, I'm Kumar. I grew up in India and I went to IIT. You know, I lived there for 20 years. And I was a dean for a local medical school that all of you know. The question I have, and I'm looking for hope here, how do societies sink into that and get out of it? I mean, you know, it's all depressing to see them go downhill, you know, in terms of academic freedom and all that. But how do they get out of it? Or is this hopeless?
Yes, take the. Do you want to collect a few questions? Will, please.
Thank you. No, my question follows a little on that, which is really a question, not a statement, about the relation between humanities, social sciences on the one hand versus STEM on the other. And there's a lot of kind of comparing the three cases of authoritarianism and declines of academic freedom, but I think they're very different in terms of the relation across these disciplines. It sounds like from that very moving, thank you for that incredibly moving video from Purbanan, that, you know, the RSS influence, the Hindu influence is driving all disciplines down in the respect of freedom and innovation. In the Chinese case, obviously STEM has soared in relation perhaps to humanities and social sciences. And then in the US case, Craig, that was such an interesting presentation. It seems that the wokeness and DEI attacks are on humanities and social sciences, but they're being driven through the funding channels of the sciences and medicine. And so it seems very different from the other two, and all three differ. And so I guess my question is a little related to the last one about what is the future of humanities and social sciences in these three different paradigms?
With the Dean of Humanities and Social Science. Well, let's ask the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, maybe for her thoughts.
Well,
first.
having been the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at two different STEM research universities now, I must say it's the humanities have been under assault for quite some time. I mean, I started my career at Johns Hopkins in 2000, a quarter of a century ago, and you know, at Hopkins, it was still it had a medical school, so I've always been at institutions where the humanities and social sciences had to justify their value. We had, as faculty, we had to hear that no one ever died of English. So, you know, but you know, people actually have died of English and language, right? So, and we know that because we're human. We study the humanities and social sciences. But seriously, I do think there's a bit of a crisis of the value proposition of what do you get if you you know, spend $80,000 a year with a major in gender studies. Like, what kind of job does that get you? What is your return on investment? And there is a bit of a crisis there. And so I think those of us in this field need to do a much better job of articulating that the skills we gain from the humanities and social sciences are actually those that are going to make our graduates in those majors far more resilient and able to adapt to a rapidly changing technological society where the code that the computer science majors are learning right now, it's dated in a month. It is literally dated in a month. And so being able to communicate, to work with people, to empathize, to think critically, to think creatively, to have the self-confidence to do that rather than just sitting behind a computer all day long or years long, as it may be. That's what's going to keep us employed when everything else has been automated. And that just has to be articulated a lot better.
Yeah, I'm accumulating too many things. I keep hoarding them up here. Quickly, let me go back. First comment there. Academic freedom is not a transcendent value, it seems to me. It's a historically situated good. It's genuinely good, but it's good and it's fit to historically produced context and institutions and so forth. Second, it calls our attention to some things and blocks our attention from others. It facilitates a kind of freedom based on pulling back from the contradictions of capitalism. So I wouldn't quite say it's just a capitalist thing so much as it's a way of understanding freedom by not thinking of capitalism and the political economy and the hierarchy and the inequality and all the things that go with it. In this, not unlike versions of democracy, which imagine that it's a transcendent good and that there's no political economy and that there's no issue of relationship to inequality or the compromises with capitalism or other things that shape how well democracy is working and for whom. You mentioned quickly Gramsci. Just let me say, it's an important feature of the so-called national conservative and these movements that the Gramscianism and Marcusianism of the right is much more vital today than the left. Gramsci and Marcuse are central figures in the new right-wing movement internationally. This cultural Marxism is not just a sign for anti-Semitism. It is an actual embrace of the idea boiled down to a phrase by Andrew Breitbart: politics is downstream from culture. In this context, very more quickly, yes, higher education is in many ways an industry, and it helps to look at it. It's not only an industry, we have ideals about it, but then people sometimes have ideals about other industries too. This undermines the extent to which we can rescue seeing it as a public good, but seeing it as a public good is part of the answer to what can we do now. It's worth noting within this context that DEI was an industry, and to some extent still is, with consultants and capital investments, and it was a big business providing the university presidents and boards of the world with ready-made teams to come in and tell you how to do this, with the hiring of large numbers of non-faculty people in various kinds of offices to manage this. And I'm talking about things that are good that I believe in, as well as things that I'm more suspicious of. The way of doing it was to add on to the budget of the university and the organizational structure of the university new offices to do it, and that's worth thinking about. The attacks on elite universities that are driving all of this are specifically on elite. It's not an accident. It's not just that let's do it everywhere, and by the way, Harvard's a big one. It's real specific resentments and worries about what elite universities are doing and teaching, and their very elitism and a desire to change that. It's not the left that is being anti-elitist. The left, in fact, the left doesn't exist anymore. It just became a sort of version of liberalism that bought into many of the elitist structures. The anti-elitism is coming from the right. Now, that doesn't make it good, but we should be conscious of this. The crisis of the humanities, I think, I agree, but add to it, like I said, it reflects not just attacks, but the harnessing of student ambitions to success in a particular kind of economy and an ideological understanding of that economy and how it works. And so, there's an underlying issue about the face of things. And lastly, in response to Kumar, I wish I had a great short answer to this, but let me give you a two-part. One, there are all the biases and issues and the ways in which the IIT has participated in a remaking of Indian higher education that wasn't helpful. But they also are very high quality institutions for the most part. And continuing to try to work through building high-quality institutions is one part of how we get out of that. And so it's not let's have high-quality IITs and allow weakness in other institutions. That isn't going to be the way forward. And secondly, let's start by thinking about remaking institutions and society rather than returning to some prior moment. Oh, before Donald Trump, oh, before Modi, everything was fine then. That's not true. Everything wasn't fine. And the particular crisis that we're living through is partly because it wasn't fine. And so we need to look at what we're building now and not at just resistance or just return.
No, I really enjoyed all the presentations. Apurvanand, if it can be, he will hear this as well. I don't know him. I didn't even know him till I heard his name in this conference. But I just wanted to say that I have several different issues, and I'm no longer as coherent maybe as I might have been earlier. But I wanted to pick up on the issue that Nidhi brought up, but in the historian's way, which is recently I've been thinking, what we've had in the post-war era in particular is not the norm. It was the exception. Before it, after it, and even if you link it to a capitalist, and I do think that the emergence of this idea of freedom and so on has to do with, the rise of bourgeois capitalism, but in the West, right? It was culturally conditioned. And that idea was never linearly developed. I mean, these professions were started in the 1890s as part of nationalism. The Germans lost the Franco-German War, and they said, okay, we have to start establishing history institutions and they all started developing around then as academic institutions. But I just, what was my train of thought there? So the thing is that it was also repressed many times, but in some ways we are returning to a norm. I mean, it could be a Polanyi type of norm, but we are returning to that. Yeah. And I think that the case of China shows very well that it was a culturally conditioned thing, because you have China now competitive in so many areas that, without the so-called freedoms that we have talked about. So I don't know where to go with this, but certainly it is off and on.
I think I would agree that the post-war rise of the great American research university that ended up being replicated in many other parts of the world was exceptional in some ways, and that we probably won't return to that particular pattern of higher ed. But we've just gone through, as President Towers mentioned, an unprecedented, well, it feels like, at least in our lifetime, an unprecedented pace of technological change. And so the anxieties that faculty are having right now are not just about the political attacks, but also about that their positions will be automated. Our writing faculty don't know what to do. I mean, they're trying to lean into LLMs, but all the papers that students have submitted this past semester, like a lot of them are clearly generated by AI. So there's this real crisis, identity crisis and value-added crisis of what do we do? How do we educate at the higher level, or really at every level, in the age of AI? I mean, so there's a lot more going on. I agree we're not going back, and that was exceptional, but we're moving to something else.
Yes, to everything President just said. I think that's exactly right. I just said there are multiple temporalities to this. So there is this post-war exception. There's a longer pattern. There's a 20th century version. There's a still longer pattern and so forth to this that are significant. You already alluded to that in your comments about the rise in nationalism of the 1890s and so forth. Let me just say, I think crucial to what we need to get in our heads is that each of these is shaped by contradictions. it's not that any of these are periods that are all one thing or all another thing. They embody tensions, contradictions, struggles on this. So the post-war university was liberation and social mobility for some, and it was tied to all kinds of things that were attractive in this promise, and not just in the North and West, but in a variety of developing country settings where the building of a national university created opportunities for young people's lives as well as for social mobility and all of that. But it was also security, technology, prosperity, and these contending pressures could be pulled in different ways.
Okay, yes, Twiga.
Okay. I'm Ge from the visiting scholar from the Columbia University. I have a very general question about that. With China and Russia tightening its control, and like Turkey, U.S., Hungarian, Indian getting worse, does that mean this kind of era for academic freedom after the Second World War came to the end, and a new cycle started? And before we welcome a new era of this academic freedom, we might probe into the darkness for many years. That is my question. Okay, thank you.
Very rich discussion. I'm learning so much. Thank you so much. I may follow up with additional questions and thoughts. But I just want to, I guess I wouldn't say I'm the older generation in this cohort, but I feel like I have lived through all kinds of different changes in the academic and capitalism transformations. So in a way, I feel like there are never a good time, and there are always different challenges. So when the Tiananmen crisis happened in China in 1989, and I was pretty precocious middle schoolers, and I saw how my older cousins got into trouble, how other teachers got into trouble. But then also that types of students, I didn't feel like they were really being very nice. The types of student life or intellectual life of the 1980s, again, I was not admiring them. And then as I went to college in the 1990s at Beida, and we were just experiencing the post-Marxist Tiananmen period. So there's a lot of stabilization. And so stabilization was going on, but we kind of see the stabilization coming out of a very chaotic 3 years. I feel like the stabilization was quite effective. So the types of consensus and calm and empathy, and also the transition from being just free thinkers to being very useful, to be very productive talent, so to speak, as a goal was very clear. But that it didn't help. 1998, when we graduated, we lost all our jobs. So even you learned everything, we kind of lost our jobs. And then I came to the United States. Luckily, it was before 9/11, and then 9/11 happened. So in the U.S., it was crazy. So that period, I remember I was reading so many books written by scholars in this audience on the discontents and globalization, right? Social movements, etc. So it's never easy. And in just a recent 2-3 waves, Obama period, Trump 1, and Biden, and now Trump 2. And I feel like my colleagues often got either very excited or get very gloomy. But I feel like it's always a tension back and forth and back and forth. So as an individual, I I just feel like as a scholar, right, I teach China studies, and I'm not worried about like being irrelevant because like social science or China or English, to me, it's always a tool, right? We learned it, now we have to teach our students. I don't think American students know how to do analytical writing, and I have to do so much like teaching them how to learn themselves. And I just want to feel like underscore that the college classrooms nowadays, students, I feel like there are a lot, we're not like signaling how to improve them. Like you have to give them, like when they enter your class and when they leave, there should be marked change in their capacity. And not thinking of giving them that or not believing them they can improve. That's just wrong. One thing I feel like as a scholar, maybe sometimes religion helps, right? It's about your own clarity, but also I think the institution, if they will come out okay. And again, coming from a young old perspective in this room. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Min.
Hi, my question is to Dr. Tsai or Professor Tsai. Before you said the humanities have to be presented in a different way, but unfortunately, in the moment, it's the sciences and math that's producing all the values that societies around the world need. How would you represent humanities as a subject to follow, as a subject to study?
I feel like I addressed that earlier by saying that really the skills and the competencies that are developed through the study of the humanities and social sciences are, I believe, fundamentally more enduring and adaptable than some of the very specific tools in the STEM fields that are, I think, ultimately, I mean, our students who are majoring in accounting and computer science, their skills are going to be dated so much more faster than someone who majored in history or philosophy or political science.
I totally hear you with that, but within the moment, that's the knowledge that's needed in the moment. So the value you're stating is something that'll come about in the future. But in the moment, people need technology because of the technology revolution that's going on. How would you convince someone who's interested in studying the humanities to study that?
Yeah, actually, at my current institution, Northeastern University, most of our majors are combined majors. So like philosophy and physics is really popular, computer science and political science. So that they're actually doing both. They don't want to do just one or the other. I think that students recognize that.
So what you're saying now is it's important to have a dichotomy of knowledge to students, that as important as the sciences are, it's just as important to understand philosophy.
I think a well-rounded liberal arts education still has fundamental value. I do think we need to move on, though, because we're running out of time. So thank you.
Okay, Theo, you've been waiting patiently.
I'm so curious and very interested in the comparison made by the Professor Tsai between the academic freedom in Mao's area and also the Xi Jinping's area. Sorry, I mean, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. So I think there's a quite contrast between these two academic freedom restriction or curb, because I feel like in the period of Mao, and they try to transform the elites in the lectures by means of this totalitarian movement, which means that Mao tried to involve all these academic intellectuals, elites, into a very, how can I say, intensive mass movement, such as reporting to each other, and also like impose the terrorism, etc. So I mean, it is more like a ideological, moral incentive or the punishment try to transform and curb these intellectuals. But on the other hand, if we see what the Xi Jinping did in these decades, it seems like they try to, CCP are more likely, more prefer to use the marketing management, try to put all these professors and also young professors and the PhD graduate students looking for position in university in a very competitive market, and especially in the COVID-19 period, and there's a vast expansion in PhD admission, and now we're going to find a huge amount of the PhD graduates pull into the market. And the interesting thing is that there's
but I guess I was just thinking, there's been a correlation before that shows that a lot of members of terrorist organizations actually have a background in being engineers, and that it did, at least a long time ago, but it shows that trend is still continuing. And so I guess I have a little bit of a statement as well as a question, but it kind of goes along with how there's a question of what is the value of humanities today in an age of automation. And I guess just thinking about that very interesting fact that engineering and STEM, I guess, seems to be this background for maybe lacking, whether it is empathy or possibly critical thinking, and then the link to extremism. Okay. So I guess my question is that in this day and age, if we're worrying about extremism and maybe even conservatism, what value does humanities have in maybe reversing this trajectory that we're seeing?
It's probably impossible to answer, but I'm provoked positively by Professor Tsai's comments about the writing teachers at Northeastern saying, what am I going to be teaching? And I was thinking at that moment in response, where is thinking going to be taught if people, that's it.
Craig, do you want to go first?
Okay, lots of great comments. I won't touch on everything. I'll zero in on one vaguely related to the last. It's an uncomfortable truth that many of our academic ideals, including academic freedom, but also including just studying what you think is interesting and important, are tied to relatively privileged elite institutions of the past, aristocratic heritage. And they came under attack. Whoever spoke about cycles, are we hitting a new cycle in this era? Well, maybe since the 70s, since the defeat of the 68 movement. So there's been a cycle of intensifying, making society more unequal, not just here, but everywhere, making college unequal and expensive, and expanding enrollment, which not surprisingly got everybody focused on what job are you going to get to pay for this college that you've accumulated debt to go through, rather than on just what do you want in the way of education as such. So I think we should be aware that that's the apolitical economic background to this. And we could do things like make college more affordable, right? And change the massification of it in relation to the labor market.
Briefly, thank you so much for all your questions and commentary. The question of where is thinking going to be taught, I think I was really struck by Apurvanand's sharing that the UGC is trying to shift more and more teaching into the online mode, because I think thinking occurs more in the classroom than online, generally speaking. And so that's just it's a very special place, sitting around that seminar table and sitting with kind of uncomfortable, unanswerable issues, and it is very uncomfortable, actually. And then just going back and forth and agreeing to disagree in a very civil manner, understanding that for any issue there are so many different ways of approaching that, and that takes time. That's something, when Claude spits it out in 2 seconds, and you read it and then you reproduce it and hand it. That's not learning, right? That's not really evolving your thinking or developing empathy for another perspective, even if it's like incredibly offensive to one personally. So I think that the classroom experience does have to be preserved, and then applying it to the real world, to showing how the relevance of knowledge is something that students really crave as well. Yeah. So I'll leave it at that.
It's a very nice note to end on. Let's thank our panelists, and thank you for the questions. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in this room for our panel on deglobalization and international political economy. Thank you and have a good evening.